Welcome back. Now that you've seen the video on Ludic Space, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you in here how to go ahead and to create or import and create an environment using the modular assets that I am providing to you. What you're seeing here on the screen is I have a level set up and I have these objects put in place. These are all modular. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to show you how it can be how the pieces are imported. I'm going to show you how to create the texture for the buildings. And then I'm going to provide a link to all of the additional assets that you see in here. And for example, this is a third-person world, so I'm going to go ahead and hit play on this one. And I'm going to go and look at the environment. And what we have is we've got a big building here. It's made with modular pieces. The material actually has, the glass is reflective. You can actually see the player in there. You can see the world being reflected in the glass there. You can't see through the glass, but you can see the world being reflected in it. I have a variety of assets over here. Basically, it's a couple of wooden pallets, a crate, a shipping container, and then the block fencing that you see that runs all the way around the outside. The wooden gate that you see here that's not openable. I've got some power settings here. I got a power indicator. I've got some sort of piping or water piping coming through the wall. I've got another building set up here with an open door, and then inside of it we've got lighting. We've got some boxes and some containers and some shipping stands. We've got some soda machines, a desk, clipboard, chair, some power units that are all textured and ready to go. And then if I come back out of here, you basically have this entire world. I think there's also a wall, a power thing right here on the wall that has been created. So there's a lot of elements here, and this is just a fraction of the elements that have been created and that I provide for you. Another thing that you're seeing up here on the building is there's some emergency lighting up there, and there's also a security cam right above his head there. There's a security cam up there that is like it's looking down on this yard. And I don't have any other textures or anything going on in here, but what we're going to do is I'm going to show you, first of all, how you need to import those models, and then I'm going to show you how to create the texture that goes on. It's a fairly complicated texture. Let me get out of there. A fairly complicated texture or material, excuse me. It's not texture. It's a fairly complicated material. And I'm going to walk you through this one so you can understand how it works and how to set it up so you have everything on it that you need with the provided images that are out there on the Google Drive. So I'm going to do a pause here, and then I'm going to come back with a new file, and then I'm going to show you how to import it, how to get everything all set up, and then we'll see how we go from there. So I'm going to pause here for just a moment. Okay, so I'm back. What I've done is I've created a new level, and I just named it, in this case, modular tutorial, but you can name it whatever you want. What I have done is I have created a new blank level. It is a third-person game, which you're going to need the third person because you need to be able to run around and make sure things are sized the way that they need to be. I've already got it set up so they should be sized correctly. When I created the models and exported them out, I'm pretty sure I got them all set up, so you shouldn't have a problem with that. You shouldn't have to scale them up or down at all. We'll talk about that later on in case you do. I have some assets that you might want to bring in that will be a different size, and you'll have to figure out exactly what the size relationship has to be to a third person or a first person or whatever it is you're doing. I believe first and third are the same size aspects. They just look different, so things have a different feel if you're in first person as opposed to third person because of perspective. But I got a new blank level here. I created this world. It's a third-person world, and it also has all the content. So I do have the starter content, which includes all of the textures. So if I go in here and say I'd like to have a material, maybe I'd like to make the ground look like basic flooring, or I want it to look like concrete, or whatever it is I want it to do at this particular point in time, I've got that. In terms of the size of this object right here, I'm going to leave it the way it is right now. This is the default setting on it. If I go in here and click play, I got my third person. He's standing right there. For right now, I'm not going to change the size of that. Because I want to bring the pieces in and I want to see how I would like to maybe arrange this. And I may just leave it this size and do a very abbreviated area just so you can kind of see how it all comes together and how you might want to lay it out. One of the things I have discovered when I'm doing this is because I'm not really sure which direction my buildings are going to go, how long or how wide or how the pieces are all going to flow together. I usually don't do that until the very end. I'm looking for size relationship. I'm looking to make sure that the buildings are the correct size, that they feel natural, that the door is big enough for me to go through, that the windows are, head height. If I'm using stairs, I'm able to get up the stairs or the steps the way I'm supposed to. And then if I need to increase the size of that floor, that's a very easy thing to do. It's just an asset that's there, and it's the pre-made asset, and I can scale it up or down, and I can texture it. So I'm pretty much unconcerned with how that works to begin with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over here to my content browser. I'm going to first create a new folder, and I'm going to call that Modular Architecture. Remember, you can't use spaces when you're typing these things up. Modular Architecture. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to import the textures. Now, the textures that I have given you, which are out in the Google Drive, and there's a link in Canvas to the Google Drive for this week's assignments. You're going to see there are 6 textures that are out here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on all 6 of them, and I'm going to bring them in. It takes a couple of seconds. It's going to process the normal map as a normal map, and it's going to give me all the ones that I need. Now, the building window mask right here, this white image with the gray, we don't actually need that, so if you want to, you can delete it. You don't really need to use that, but you've got those textures right there. Once I've got this, now what I'm going to do is I need to show you, if you haven't created a folder ahead of time, how you can now create a folder, and then you can move objects into that folder. It's a little tricky when you're working with Unreal. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, and inside of this folder I'm going to add a new folder, and I'm going to just call this Textures. And then I'm going to select all of these images here, and I'm going to slide them over to that folder, and a little window pops up. Okay, you have a choice to copy here, or you have a choice to move here. And I don't want to copy them in there. Those are just going to be fine. So I'm just going to go ahead and click Move here. And it will move them into that folder, and now they're all in here. Okay, I'm going to do this sort of the same thing. This is kind of the way I use workflow. I need to get a texture. So or a material, excuse me. I'm going to take these textures and make them into a material. So I'm going to right click on that main texture right there, and I'm going to click Create Material, and I'm going to call it M_building. Okay, and what it's going to do is it's going to come in with that thing already pre-wired. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my modular architecture, and I'm going to create a new folder up here. Create a new folder. I'm going to call this one Materials. Okay, it's empty. So I'm going to go back to my Textures folder. This building material, I want it to be in the Materials folder. So I'm just going to click on it, and I'm going to drag it over until it touches Materials over here in my content list. And I'll get the same thing. I'm going to move it here. Now it's over there, and it's ready for me to start working on it. Okay, I'm going to come back to this in a moment. Now what I want to do is go back to my modular architecture. I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to create a new folder, and we'll just call this one Building Assets. All right, so this is where all of my models are going to go. And I'm going to do an import here, and then I'm going to come up a level, and I have already put this image out there. It's an FBX file. It was done in 3ds Max and it's called Final to Size _ 2018. These are all of the assets together in one file. When you're working in a 3D program, one of the beauties of the newer version as opposed to the older version, we used to deal in the older version with a different file format. And that file format would only do one model at a time. So if I had 30, 40, 50 assets and I'm working on them all in the same big file, because I'm checking size relationships and I'm using a lot of the same textures, and so I've got all these different assets all created in a file, I have to export them out one at a time, so they're in their own individual file formats. And that was a real pain because you got to do the same thing 30 times if there's 30 models. Now, in this particular case, I think there's about 18 of them, or maybe 14 of them. So I would have to export them all out. They'd all have to be at 0, 0, 0 in the world, in the 3D world, 0x, 0y, and 0z. And then I would have to make sure that they were exported out one at a time, and then they could be textured, and that would all be fine. But it was doing the same thing 30 or 14 or however many times you had to do it was a real pain. Then along comes the .fbx, which is the universal format for exporting out 3D models. And the beauty of this is I can export all 30 models or all 14 models or however many I have as one individual file. And you'll see here in a minute when I bring it in, I can either have it be combined or I can have it be separated out. And that's kind of what you're going to have to watch for when you're doing a model. When you download models from TurboSquid or someplace like that, you're going to have to probably do it twice if you're not sure. Sometimes people do the same thing. If an object, a particular asset is made up of several different pieces, and you don't have combined meshes checked, then you'll end up with, for instance, a car will come in with the wheels separated out, as each wheel will be an individual object, and maybe whatever else you have on that car will come in as an individual object, and then you'll have the body as an individual object, and you'll look at it and you'll go, ooh, that's not what I wanted, and you have to delete them all and go back and make sure you check the button that says combine meshes. And there's really no way of knowing ahead of time whether that's going to be the case. So that's kind of why I'm doing this now and telling you this is the case where we're going to make sure that we don't import it as one model, or all the pieces will come in and they cannot be separated out in Unreal. Right? So this is the file that I want, File to Size 2018. I'm going to double click on it. The window is going to pop up for FBX imports. Now, it was exported out accidentally with the skeletal, the animation button has been checked. Now, there is no animation, there are no bones anywhere on any of the objects. It was just exported out wrong. This is something else you have to be aware of. I did this on purpose because you're going to have to watch this to make sure. If you know the object you are importing is not meant to be animated, then you need to make sure if it comes in checked as import as skeletal that you turn that off. Okay. Also, I'm going to recommend that you uncheck auto-generate collision. All right. Don't do that. Most of the elements that are in here are simple collision shapes. There is a door that we need to deal with, and I'm going to deal with that separately. I'll do something in there a little bit differently for that. I think we'll be okay. So we don't want to turn those things on. Now, normally when you open this thing up, that's closed. All right. Import materials. I'm not going to do that and textures because I've already got the textures in here. I already have a material that I need to go in and build. So I don't want to start with that for right now. I'm going to handle that manually. One of the things I will tell you about importing objects, assets that have materials or textures already on them. You remember down here, if I look at that my textures, I can't get down there, but my textures, there are 6 individual images I'm going to be using. When you go in and say, hey, import materials and import textures, what it will do is it's based off of the textures that were used in the 3D program that you modeled them in. Now, in the case of these particular pieces, they were modeled in 3ds Max. because they were built, I built them to go into a 3D game engine. I built them with an idea that I'm going to do the texturing in here. The only thing that I needed to see in the 3D program of all those images, specular and normal and all of the other ones that I've imported here, masks and stuff like that, they're unnecessary in a 3D game program or 3D modeling program. I only need to see the basic diffuse texture that we're going to be working with. So that's the only thing that I used. So when it was exported, the only information that it has on it is just the diffuse slot, the base color, the building material that we're going to be using. The normals and the speculars and the masks weren't in there. So if I were to go ahead and say import material, what it would do is it would create material using the only material that it recognizes as being on that model, and that's the diffuse texture slot, the building, I think it's underscore CLR. So I usually, because it doesn't import all of the ones that I need, I usually just do this myself. And you can do it either way if you want to. You just saw what I did, and I created that. It doesn't take that long to do, and I feel that there's less chance of a mistake if I handle that myself. So those things are turned off. Now, this is normally closed up. So if you open this up, you'll see right down here at the bottom it says Combine Meshes. It'll either be checked, which means it'll bring everything in as one big model, or if you uncheck that, it'll bring all of the pieces in separately, which is what I want. Okay. So once I've got that set up, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to click Import All. You may get a warning. Well, you're going to get this warning for sure. Okay. It says the door single has degenerative tangent bases, which will result in incorrect shading. I'm not too worried about that because I'm just giving this thing for you guys to see how it works. All of the other pieces are fine. There is one model that I created, the door, that is a little bit different, and I'm getting a warning on that. You want to look for warnings in this message log about things like lighting and about shadows, because you might get some odd shadows cast upon certain things. It has to do with the way an object was modeled. It has to do with the light maps that we've talked about in an earlier video. If the object is not created correctly, and it is highlighted right there. You can see it's giving me a warning, and it's highlighted that door down here. So there's something about that particular door that it doesn't like. It's going to work fine on this one, trust me. But in the future, you might kind of want to watch these things. And a lot of times you're going to get warnings up here that have no bearing on anything. And I usually just click it and say OK, and then watch for that. That's just an idea that you need to come back and kind of watch for something like that. So here's what we have. We have these elements down here. For instance, there's the doorway. Okay, there's no texture on it yet, so I really can't tell what it's going to look like or whether there's going to be weird shadowing on it. It looks like it's going to be okay. All of these assets have been brought in. They're all untextured. And what I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to go in and I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to do a save, because none of these things are saved yet. If I look at my material, that is, I look at my textures, they are. But none of my building assets are saved. So I'm just going to do a quick Control S, and all of those things will be saved. And then I know that if I need these things, that if the program crashes on me, I'm all set. Right? So I'm going to go back to my material here, and I'm going to open up my material. And what I need to do is I'm going to show you how to build this material and get it all set up. Now, I do have on Canvas, there is a separate page. And I'll swing it over here so you can see it. There is a separate page over here that talks about creating the material for modular buildings, and it tells you where the Google Drive is, and it's a link to it, and then it gives you a basic setup of the individual things. And I'm going to create that one from scratch so I can show you the first 4 images that are here. Show you the various sections. I'm going to have a base color section. All right, which I've already got a base color in there, but you can see I'm going to be adding in something. I'm going to be adding some moss. I want some moss on my buildings. So the brick is going to have some areas that contain some moss growing on it, because it's supposed to look like it's been there for a while. So I've got a section of that that's going to have 2 materials that are going to be blended together. Then I've got down here, I've got some metallic and some roughness. Now this has to do with the windows. So these are the 2 things that are going to be used on the window, and they're both wired in, and they show you where they're wired into. And they also have in here in the comments, if you're not sure, they tell you where they're wired in. Metallic is wired into metallic, and roughness is wired into roughness, even though that's cut off a little bit. Then we go down and we look at the specular, the shininess aspect of it, because there is some shininess involved with this one. So I've got a section down here on some shininess. I'm going to go through and we'll talk about how we got these things, how we make them, and how they're all wired in through here. And then I have my normal maps. Remember, the normal maps are the things that make things look three-dimensional. So these are my normal maps, and I have one for my building, and I have another one for the moss. And I've got two different things going on here, and I'll explain why I have two different things going on here for the moss. And then I have the masking set up. And the masking, this is a file over here. We're going to talk about that when I get ready to look at this one. And we'll talk about how this can be used and why it's used and how it's created in such a way that it becomes useful. So we'll look at that one as well. And then the very last picture down here is an overall sitemap. And it's hard for me to, if I'm creating a texture, it's hard for me to go back and try to zoom in and show you each thing that shows all the wiring on it. So what I do is I show you these images up here and get them with as much detail as you can so you can see what it is. It identifies what the pictures are. It identifies some of the settings on there. And then what it does is, if you can't really see where all those wires go, like you can see a wire coming out this way, but you're not quite sure where it's going, if you look down here, you'll actually see where all those wires are going. So it's a chance for you to build this section and then wire everything all up and get it all set up. And it just gives you the overall site plan of what that texture should work, what should look like. And what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to see, as you're going, you'll be able to see the texture, the material as it's created, and you'll be able to check on that. So that's kind of where we are going on this one. So first thing I need to do here is I need to bring in all of the other images. So I'll put this thing off to the side here, and we'll go back and we'll get our textures. And then I'm just going to bring them all in at the same time. It's going to be all of these down here. And let's pull this thing back up full screen so I have as much room as possible in here. And let's look at the images that we have. The diffuse, the base color slot, is already filled up. Now I'm going to break that because I'm going to right click and select break link, because I've got to build some things that are a little bit different. But these are the two textures that are going to go together. There's moss and there is bricks. And so these two are going to go together, and I'm going to kind of pull them up into here. Okay. This one here, the kind of bluish one, is my specular. Now, if you're not sure, you bring them all in, but you're like, well, I can't remember what that one does. Remember, if you select it over here on the left-hand side in your details window, it will tell you which image you have. And remember, every texture that is in this game, and I brought in the basic content, so there are a lot of textures that are in here for me to pick and choose from, and I can change that to just about anything, but I'm going to leave that the way it is, obviously. But it tells me right there that that's the building specular. So if there's an image and you're like, I can't quite remember what that one does, remember, you can always click on it and you can see. Then I've got my two normal maps, the two blue ones here. I have the normal map for moss, and I have the normal map for the building, so I'm going to keep those together here for a moment. This is my mask. And what I'll do here is, in a minute, I'll show you what this mask looks like in Photoshop and explain to you how it's set up and why that it's set up. But for right now, this is my masking, and this is what's going to be used to control which elements go where, which things are building, which things are moss, and which things are glass. And it's all built into a single file here in order to create as much of a as much efficiency as I can get into an image. It's actually 3 images. It's got 3 uses all rolled into one image. So we'll come back and we'll look at that one here in a moment. All right. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and I'm going to look at my base color right here. All right, for my base color. Now, the first thing I need to do is I'm going to be blending these 2 images together. Anytime we have to, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a brick texture that's going to go down first, and then I'm going to have areas that are going to become moss. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I need to blend these 2 images together so I can use them. And whenever we're using a blend, we do something, use a linear interpolative which is called a lerp. And to get a lerp, what you're going to do is you're going to hold down L on your keyboard and you're going to left click. I'm actually going to need 2 of those, so that's why I did that. Okay. So a lerp allows me to blend 2 objects together. And the way that it works is I have a slot A and I have a slot B. And then I have an alpha channel, and the alpha channel can be anything. It just determines how these 2 things are going to be blended together. So we're going to have, our alpha is actually going to be assigned to our mask over here, because the mask is what determines what's going to be the building and what is going to be the... Okay, now what I'm going to do is I have to blend that together now with the other elements that I've got going on in here. So what I'm going to do is for right now, I'm just going to wire this into A. I'm going to have some other things going into B here in a moment. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that and I'm going to wire that into my base color. Now, I think the best way for me to do this one is to look at a plane and kind of see what's going on. And you'll notice it looks really odd. It's not really going to look finished yet, because what's going on here is I'm blending 2 images together, and I don't have a blend coming out of my B over here yet, and I don't have any alpha settings in there yet. So it looks kind of glazed over here, and that's good for right now. That's kind of what we need. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to select all of these, and because it's the easiest way to keep track of the things that I'm doing, if I just marquee, left click and draw a box around those things, I'm going to hit C for comment on my keyboard. And what it'll do is it'll add this little window around there that I can pick up, and I can change the size of that thing. And I can also click in here and say, look, this is going to be my base color. Just type in base color and hit enter. I've got a comment there. The beauty about this is that I have 4 elements here that I'm going to have to be probably rearranging things as I go. And it's a real pain in the butt to have to go in and select all of these and then pick them up and move them around, and then take these and pick them up and move them around, and take this one and pick it up and move it around. When I've got a little grouping like this that needs to stay together, by putting it in a comment, all I need to do is grab the comment up here and pick it up and move it around. Now I can still take these things and move them around individually, but I can move the entire batch just by picking this thing up and sliding it around. Also, I can tell when I'm way out like this what those elements are doing. I know that those are all associated with the base color. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in here a little bit closer here, and what I'm going to do is my metallic is going to be a value, and to add in a value we're going to add a constant. And a constant, remember there's 1, 2, 3, and 4 constant values. They're all based off of numbers. So if I want a 1 constant, I'm just going to hold down a 1 and left click, and I'm going to get a numeric value that I can type in. In this particular case, I want things to be a little bit shiny, so the setting I'm going to use on this one is 0.55. And it's going to get just a little bit shinier. All right. So you can put a comment around that. I'll just put comment on here. I'll go ahead and click on this one, and we'll call this one metallic. And kind of pull it down here. All right. Now, what I need for roughness here, specular is going to be a whole separate section down here. In fact, I think I'll do specular first, and then I'll come back and I'll show you roughness, because I kind of need to have the roughness wired to the mask. No, I'll show it to you now, because you need to see how this works. What I'm going to do is the roughness over here. Remember, the roughness is the reflection. Okay, and I want my windows to be reflective. Now you'll notice over here that there is some yellow boxes and some blue boxes and some green boxes going on over here in this section. What are those things, and what are they doing? Well, let's go back here and let's look at the pictures in Photoshop. So what I have here is I have all of the images to show you in Photoshop, so we can take a look at what these images are and what they're doing. This is the building image. This is the main image. Now, the way that this was made is it's laid out as a bunch of individual pieces. This is all one texture, but every identifiable piece that we're going to have the models of comes out of this texture. In fact, the building was modeled to this texture. The way that we do this is we create an image, and you can see there's a section up over here that looks like that. There's one section of building. Then you've got a window underneath it. You have another window underneath that. Then you have two concrete pieces down here. There's one concrete piece that runs to there, and then there's another concrete piece that runs right next to it. These are base elements that you see. There's a column that's laying on its side down here on the bottom left. You have a big brick wall right here. You have a little sign in the middle right there. You've got one door over here. You've got a rolling doorway here. This is one that rolls up and down. You've got some sort of a vent system up here, and then you have a little air conditioning unit back up over here in the corner. And the only dead gap that you see on this, where there is no object represented, is right there. There's this little tiny corner right there because it couldn't be made to fit. So what we do is, and it's a square image, I think it's 2048 by 2048. It's a square image, a power of 2. And then what I can do is I can go into a 3D program and I can take this texture and I can put this texture onto a big flat plane, and then I can start cutting that flat plane up. So it's a piece like this, and then it's a piece that's just a window, and then it's another window right here, and then I can take each of those individual pieces that have a texture on them already, and then I can turn them into 3D objects, which is exactly what I did with those pieces you just imported. They were all modeled with this texture on it, so I knew exactly how big that was going to be. All I needed to do was to extrude it out to make it three-dimensional, texture the sides, and get them all ready to go, get them set up so they were ready to go into a game engine, and then export them out. And in some cases, I can use and create multiple things. The rolling door actually has a concrete element up above it. The air conditioning vent, or this vent series right here, actually looks a little bit different than it does here because that's the way I modeled it. The windows, there's more than just 2 windows represented in the models, and that's because I can use that texture and I can create any number of pieces as long as I'm picking elements out of here. And if you really want to know how to do this one, then I would suggest you take the 3D modeling class, in which this is a prominent part. We show you how to take that texture and to turn it into 3D models. And then also, once you understand how this all comes together, or how you can assemble objects like the textures like this, there's no end to the different textures that you can create yourself. So this is the base texture. The normal map controls all of the elements. You can see the brick textures, the lines that run through the door, the vents on the regular, that's the big rolling door, the vents on the metal door over here, the air conditioning vent, the air conditioning unit up over here that's got the fan in it. You got little fans in the windows over here. You got bricks up there. The concrete's got some roughness to it. The windows have some stuff going on. In fact, if I zoom in on the window here, you can probably see there's like in some cases the windows have like boards in them, and you can see the roughness on the board. And remember, this map is controlling all of the raised and lowered areas that you're going to be using on that. So that's in there also. You have a specular one, and a specular, remember, it's going to control shininess. And so it's kind of a bluish cast to this, but the reason it is kind of a bluish cast is that there is a red channel and a blue channel, or green channel and a blue channel, and they're all combined together to give me kind of this reddish tint, or the bluish tint, and that kind of mutes the effect of that just a little bit. And I'm just looking for the areas that are really the darkest are the areas that are going to be the shiniest. All right. Then I have my Moss image, and it's just a generic seamless image that I got off the internet. It has to be seamless because I don't want to see a hard edge here and a hard edge over there. If I'm butting this up against it, if I'm tiling this image out in any number of directions, what I don't want to see is I don't want to see a hard line running between each of these things, so I have to have that set up accordingly. I have the normal map that goes with that. It's a relatively simple normal map, but here's the important one that we want to talk about. This is your mask. And this is really where I was going to show you kind of what's going on. And you'll notice it is in 3 colors, 3 main colors. I got some yellow, I got some blue, I got some green, and it's against a black background. A little bit of red in there as well. But why is it set up like this? Well, as I've talked about in some of the earlier videos, we need to save as much memory as possible. And every time I bring a texture over and import it in there, I have the memory associated with it. It takes up a certain amount of memory to power and to run. So what I could do is I need a mask that is going to be just for the windows, and that one is going to control the shininess of the windows or the reflectivity of it. I need an image that's going to control where the moss is going to go. I have an image that is going to control where the shininess is on the bricks, or whether where the normal map is going to be on the bricks. Do I want more normal map in the grout, or do I want more normal map on the brick itself? Where, like I said, where the moss is going to be, where it's going to be applied, and if I wanted to make this building look wet, where the water would accumulate and where it would be the most wet. So I need all of those images. So if I went back and created one image for each one of those and set them all to be 1024 by 1024, they're all going to be about a meg a piece. And if I brought all of those individual images in, I would probably have 6 or 7 images that I would bring in. So that's 6 or 7 megs all applied into a texture that already has some big textures built into it already. I've already got moss, and I've already got brick, and I've already got specular, and I've got the normal maps associated with those. So that would become a huge material file at that point because of all of the individual images I needed to bring in. Well, what I can do in Photoshop is a Photoshop image is really 3 separate images rolled into one. There is a red image, there is a green image, and there is a blue image. Okay, when I look at them all together, they look like this, but this has nothing to do with the way I'm going to be using it. What I'm going to be doing is I'm actually going to be using the red channel and the blue channel, and I can use the green channel as 3 separate images. So all I need to do is, if I import this one full color image, it's really made up of red, green, and blue. And what I can then do is I can go back and say, look, this is one image. It's still going to be 1 meg. There's no getting around that. But I don't have 3 megs worth of images I'm bringing in because I've got 3 separate pictures. I've got them all rolled into one. And I'm just using black and white to control where the moss is going to be. I'm using 1 black and white image to control where reflectivity is going to be, and 1 image to control where, say, opacity would be if I wanted the windows to be slightly see-through. So I have all of these images. Rather than bring them in separately, I can bring them all in on their own individual channels. And so the way it looks is irrelevant. It's actually, think of it as 1, 2, 3 separate images I'm going to be bringing in. So let's take this thing back out of here, and let's go back and let's look at what we were doing here a second ago. So there's my mask right here. All right. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be tying in my reflectivity to one of those channels. So which one yet? I'll go back and we'll take a look at that one here in a second. But what I need to do for my roughness here is I need it to be slightly rough. But there's an interesting effect that you have to deal with when you are working with masks. Okay, now if you remember, these are white images on a black background, and they're all combined together into one. When you are dealing with reflectivity, or you're dealing with the mirror type effect, if I were just to go ahead and say, look, let's make, in this particular case, which one am I going to be using here? I think I'm going to be using the red channel for this one. So let's just say I wanted the red channel to be reflective. And brought that in. You can see the entire image gets reflected except where I want the reflectivity, which in this particular case, the reflectivity that I'm looking for is on the windows right there. And you notice the windows aren't. And that's because of the way that image was created. It's white on a black background. All right. So what the reflectivity is doing is roughness. Remember, I talked in an earlier video, runs the opposite of metallic and specular. Normally what we do is if we want a building or an object to be metallic and specular, we go in and we say, look, it's going to be on a scale from 0 to 1, and 1 is going to be really metallic or really specular, and 0 is going to be turned off. And then I talked about if I'm doing roughness, it's the exact opposite. It goes from 0 to 1, but 0 means it is not reflective, and 1 means it's not reflective, and 0 means it's highly reflective, like a mirror. So it's the opposite scale, the reverse scale of this metallic. Right? So what happens is when I wire that thing in like that, I say, look, the red channel, okay, which is, if I come back over here and look at this red channel, the red channel is that. All right, so what's happening is black is becoming reflective and white is not being reflective. Now, I don't want to have to go back to Photoshop and change this image, because actually I am using this in its current state the way that I need it. It's actually going to be used, we're going to be using this red channel for 3 separate things that we're doing. And it needs to be in this format for 2 of the 3. So what am I supposed to do about this third one here, where it runs sort of the opposite of the way that it's supposed to run? Well, there is a feature in here that allows us to take an image and to invert it. When we're dealing with a black and white image like this one, there's something called a 1-. And what 1- does is it inverts a black and white image. So I'm going to right click here, and in order to get 1-, you would think there's 2 ways to do it. You can type in ONEMINUS for 1-, or you can actually just hit 1 and then the minus key, and you'll get something called a 1-. So this is going to act as my roughness. So let's add a comment on that one, and we'll call this, actually we'll just call it, roughness. I can put reflectivity, but we'll just call it roughness for right now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to wire this into my roughness. I'm going to get an error because I don't have an image to invert. This is what these errors are. This is something you need to recognize. A lot of times when you're building material, you're not done yet. So, you're just putting a node in here and you're getting it wired up to one direction, and you get this little error. That doesn't mean you're not allowed to do that. It doesn't mean it's the wrong node and you've got to go back and figure out what the right node is. That usually just means that you're not done with it yet. And in this particular case, I have to take and wire that to an image, and in this particular case it needs to know what image it's supposed to invert, and in this particular case it's my red channel. So what happens now is my windows are reflective, and you can see that up there. The windows are reflective because it's taking that black and white image and it's inverting it so it works the way it's supposed to work. So I got a little ahead of myself there on that mask, but I think that was important for you to see how that works. All right, let's go back up now and let's look at the specular, because the specular is a fairly easy one to do. The specular is dealing with this image right here. Let's pull those kind of down and out of the way a little bit. We're dealing with specular. All right, now when I'm doing these things and I'm following an image that looks like that, just so you know, you're going to do the same thing I'm doing. Okay, you're going to see that there's a couple of elements in there. We've already seen a 1- and it's there. We've already seen a texture, it's there. We've already seen a 1 constant, it's there. And then the multiplies we've used before, so there are a couple of multiplies in there so we can put things together. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and get that one basically set up. So to get a multiply, you hold M and you left click. Now in this particular case, I need 2 of them, so I'm just going to go ahead and put that there. Okay. Now the reason I'm going to do this, and the reason I need 2 multiplies, is remember almost all of these things only have 2 slots. When you're multiplying something together, you're not multiplying 3 objects together, you're multiplying 2 objects together. And if I need to multiply 3 objects together, which is kind of what I need to do here, then what I have to do is I have to use a base multiply. I'm going to multiply that times 1 element up here and another element down here, and then this multiply is going to multiply 2 things together, so I have a completed node down here. So what I want to do is I'm going to wire that into my specular. Nothing's going to happen because I don't have anything in here yet. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to multiply one of the slots of my mask over here. One of the slots from this one is going to get multiplied down here into my specular. Now, of all of the images that I've got, this is the specular that I'm going to be dealing with is the moss. The mirror, the windows are mirror-like. That's as specular as they need to be. They're also a little bit metallic. So that's going to give me everything I need to see up over here. But the moss is going to have a little bit of shininess to it, since it's a green living plant. It's going to have a little bit of shininess to its leaves. So that's what I'm going to be dealing with. Now, the blue channel here in Photoshop, the blue channel here is the one that covers the moss and the shininess. That's what I want to be blue. So I'm going to run into the same effect here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, out of this A slot, I'm going to get a 1 minus. Now I'm going to wire that to my A slot. Now again, I'm getting an error because it's not wired into anything else. This is then going to go over here to my blue channel, and it's going to invert that around. Not going to see anything over here yet. The B slot is going to go to this one over here, and then what I'm going to do is what this is saying, basically, that the blue channel over here is going to be inverted. So I've got what I need to have here. Okay, is going to be the first thing I multiply it, and then what I'm going to multiply it by is a picture of the area that I want to be specular. That's what this image is right here. So that is going to be set to that. All right. Then the reason I'm multiplying is because I'm going to have a constant down here, holding down 1 and left clicking, and my constant is going to be set to 2.5 because I want it to be brighter. I want it to be a shinier object than just 0, which turns it off. So I'm going to go ahead and wire that into here. So what I'm getting here basically, and I don't think you can see it yet, but I'm getting a little bit of moss and building going on up there. In fact, you can't even see the building; you're just seeing moss. Oh, you're seeing them both on there. I guess you're seeing moss overlaying the building because that's not done up there yet. Okay, I'm going to come back and finish that up. But now what I've got is I've got the areas that are going to be shiny. So I'm going to go ahead and do a comment on this one, and we're going to call this one specular or shininess, whatever you'd like to call it. But that's going to be my specular setting, and we're all set right there. All right, that's really all I need to have in terms of the specular. I don't need to have anything come out of this thing for right now. Everything I need to have is right there. It's built into it, and it's the area that's shiny is coming out of my blue channel, and then the area I'm saying go ahead and multiply that panel over there by this panel right here to a value of 2.5. So I've got this one. This is going to my blue channel. I'm multiplying it by this at a strength of 2.5, and it's all being tied together up and through there. Now the normal maps. Normal maps are a little bit different. Let's grab this and see if I can't slide it maybe this way just a little bit, and we'll pull this up. This is the great thing about these comments, is that I can do stuff like that. Okay, my normal maps. I'm going to look at my normal maps here and do this one. Okay, first thing I've got is I'm actually going to be using 2 of the moss normals. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to duplicate that. So I have 2 of them because I'm going to be using 2 of those things. And I'm actually going to pull both of these kind of over here separately because of the way that I'm going to be building this one. There's my main normal map. That's really what controls the building over here. So if I pull this thing up there and go ahead and wire that into my normal, I'm going to see the 3-dimensionality on that, which looks pretty good. Okay? It does a really nice job of giving me the areas that are 3-dimensional that I need to have, and that's doing what I needed to do. Except I needed to do much more than this because I don't just have a building normal, I've got moss normal. And you can see up here what I had to do to put those things together. Okay, I'm taking A and B and I'm blending them together. And then I'm going to use an alpha channel over here, which is going to come back to my masks over here on which areas are supposed to be moss and which areas are supposed to be building. And you already kind of can see where this is going, where I already know the blue channel on this one is the moss. So I'm guessing when I actually need to mask out one of these images, I'm probably going to be tying into my blue channel for my moss. Somewhere in here I'm going to have the blue channel tied in, and somewhere I'm going to have the red channel tied in, or the entire image tied in up on this one. So I can kind of see where that one's going to go. But down over here, you can't use a lerp when you're dealing with normal maps. Okay, and the reason that you can't use a lerp when dealing with a normal map is because you're dealing with RGB amounts. So this particular image, and I'll get that Photoshop and bring it back over here and show it to you. Okay, this image has RGB values for areas that are raised up. So the different colors that you see on this thing, what they represent is areas that of X, Y, and Z are represented in R, G, and B, and the X is being pushed up a certain direction based on its color, and the Y is being the same thing, or the Z is being pushed up or down based on the color that you see represented on here. All right, well, when I start blending these things together, if I take this image like that, and I start blending it together with this image, what happens is this X, Y, and Z values, RGB values, are added onto this one, and rather than one wiping the other one out, they're basically combined. And what happens when I do something like this is you end up with some really odd distortions in areas that are supposed to be raised up, because you're taking X, Y, and Z values and adding them onto other X, Y, and Z values. Now, interestingly enough, I'm going to be using some adding in here, even though it's not really adding those things together. It's going to be excluding the other parts of it. So you'll see as I go through here. So rather than use multiply, rather than using lerp, I'm going to be using some adds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break that link. And I'm going to pull these things down here, and I kind of build these things separate down here based off of the image. So the first thing I need to have here is an add. So I just hold down A on my keyboard, and I put in an add. That's going to be the first thing. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a multiply, and I'm going to add another add. And multiply is going to go to slot A. Slot B is going to be my add down over here. Okay. Now, what my add is going to be is I'm going to add in for my A slot, I'm going to add in the texture sample of that norm. So there's my building norm. Okay. Now, what I'm going to be multiplying that, or adding together on this one, is I'm going to be adding another multiply. And that's going to be my B slot. So I've got an add. Out of my add, I've got a multiply and an add. And then out of that add, I have my building normal map, and I've got another multiply node down here. All right. Now, this top multiply, what this is going to be, is I'm going to add another multiply to it. And this is going to be tied to my B slot, because my A slot up over here out of my multiply is actually going to go up to my mask, because I only want certain areas. Again, I'm trying to control my normal maps. I want some parts of the building to have the building normal map. I want some parts of that building to have the Moss normal map. So I'm going to be tying that up into the blue channel up and through here. But what this is going to do, this thing down here, is I'm going to say I want to multiply that normal map by the masked channel up over here. So that means that I'm going to have this normal map only appear where the blue channel up here says I'm supposed to have Moss. Just like I'm going to be doing that up over here. I'm going to be saying some parts of it building, some parts of it Moss. That's the same thing I'm doing down here. Some of it has the building normal, some of it has the Moss normal. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead on this one, and we're going to go back, and we're going to say this is going to come to A. Let me pull this one down over here, because this is going to come down to this section down over through here. All right, that's going to be set to this. Now, one of the things that I have done is I found images of Moss and buildings that don't really go together. That's the building. You can see this wall. I think once we get in there and get it all set up, this wall is actually about 12 by 12. Okay, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. And the Moss that I have on here is huge. That's a photograph of Moss that's relatively close up. These two textures are the same size. So if I were to put Moss on that building, I say I want scattered Moss in here, it would be literally this big. And I need this to be considerably smaller. So it looks more like real moss on there and not like giant plants growing up the side of the building. If that was the moss on a 10 by 10 wall, that would be huge. This looks more like grass growing up the side of a wall than it does moss. So what I need to do is I need to come back and I need to make sure that I've controlled the size of this texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a texture coordinate onto this one, which is going to allow me to reduce the size of this image. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type in COORD just to start the coordinates, and then highlight it at the very bottom of that window. It says texture coordinate, and I'm going to bring that up and I'm going to wire it in. Now you may notice in the handout, these look like big color boxes, okay? And that doesn't look like a big color box. That's because this has a preview. All these things have preview windows. There's a preview window here. I can close that up. I don't need to see that texture. I can open it up if I want to see it. Same thing here. I can open that up to see what that looks like. And if I'm trying to match the color, because we are visual, I'm trying to match the colors. If I go in and type in the correct settings for this, which are 0.6 and 0.6, you see something that looks completely different. Okay? Now, this texture coordinate actually won't work. Now, the reason that this actually won't work is because I have to go in and fix it. Okay, I misspoke a little bit here. I talked about texture coordinates and making it smaller. This is really where we're talking about you going in and controlling the combination of mosses. I've got two mosses going on right here. I'm going to be combining them together, and I don't want them one becoming I don't want the normal becoming much bigger, because I'm taking these two things and I'm blending them together. So what I need to do is I need to go in and control how these things come together. Okay, so I'm going to be using a 3 constant. I'm just going to hold down the number 3 and I'm going to click, and I'm going to drag this thing up over here and tie it into that. And let me explain to you why I'm using a 3 constant. This is the RGB factors. Okay, this is a color. I can click on this and I can put in, I can pick kind of whatever color I want in through here and say, oh, that's an interesting color. Okay, good. And it has values to it, and it looks like that. But the problem is that I've got X, Y, and Z, or R, G, and B values. Remember, they go together. So I've got RGB is also working with my X, Y, and Z. So what happens is, if I go in and say, look, I've got 2 separate moss textures I'm going to be combining together here into one. What will happen is, if I go in and I just combine this one with that one, I'm taking my R and G values, which are the X and Y values, which are side to side, and I'm doubling them. And then I'm taking my Z value, which is up and down, and I am doubling that. So what happens is I'm going to get a double spike. I'm going to get double height out of my Z, and I'm going to get double side-to-side motions, or side-to-side bumping, and it's going to make it look really strange if I've got double bump values going side to side and up and down. It's just going to look really odd. So what I need to do is I need to find a way to make sure that if I'm using these two things together, that I'm only getting a full value of one or the other. And the way that we do that, and that's kind of a long, involved explanation, but the way that I do this is I actually go in and I only say, look, of the R and the G values, I don't want to use the entire amount, which is 1, 1, and 1. So if I go back in here and say, look, my settings here are 1, 1, and 1. Okay, if I use that, I'm getting full value out of my X, full value out of my Y, and full value out of my Z. So what I can do is I can say, look, let's go in and let's make this 0.6, and we'll make this one 0.6, and I'm going to set the Z value at 0. Right? And I get this nice yellow color because that's actually the color of that. But here's what it's doing. I'm only using 60% of my red and green values, and I'm using 0 amount of the blue value. So of my X and Y, which is what R and G represent, which is side to side, and basically it's left to right, up and down, I'm only using 60% of the settings that are in this one, of my red and green channels. Okay, I'm using 0% of the blue channel. So what that does is it turns off the up and down value on this one, and it only adds the side-to-side values. And then what I'm going to do on this one down over here is I'm going to do the same thing on this one, except since I'm looking for a full value of 1 total, this is 0.6 and 0.6. This one down here, I'm going to set the value of this one to 0.4 and 0.4, and I'll use 1 on that one. What the heck? I'll use 1 on that one. And then these two are going to get tied together, and the value of this one is 0.4, 0.4, and 0.4. Or 0.4 and 0.4 are the R and G, or the X and Y. This one is 0.6. You add those two together, I've got a value of 1 by adding these two images together. 0.6 and 0.4 is 1 for both of the X and Y values. And then I'm not using any up and down value on this one, but this one down here I have the full value of 1. So this is going to be my height, my normal map height on the bumpiness. So I'm going to get the full amount on that one. And if you want to, you can play with those values. You can say, look, let's make this one 0.5 and make this one up here 0.5. It changes the colors on those things, but basically what you're getting is you're getting the same effect. You're just making sure I don't want the height value to go up too much. I don't want too much distortion, and I don't want too much distortion on my normal maps side to side. So those things work actually pretty well. It's not really the tiling. Now the tiling is going to be something a little bit different here in just a second, how I control how the texture coordinates work. Because this is going to be a supplemental amount of normal maps. This is going to be added in a little bit differently. This is actually the main normal map through here. And I am going to have to scale it down just a little bit. All right. So here's what I got. There's my main normal map. I got this multiply down here. What I'm going to do with this multiply is I'm going to have to add another multiply. This is actually one more down the chain. This is going to become B, and then this is going to go to B, and this is going to go to A. Now, what's the other one going to be? Well, this one is going to be tied in to one of my channels up here. It's going to get tied into the blue channel, but I need to make sure that it's inverted. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to add another 1 minus. And that is going to go to this. Now that 1 minus down here is going to get wired into the red channel, because I need this to make sure that this goes into the opposite. Where's my channel? Down over there. Okay. I'm just going to grab that and kind of pull and drag up over here until I get to where I need to go. This is going to go into my red channel. All right. Now, I do need texture coordinates on this one down over here, so I'm going to right-click, type in chords. Sorry, just chord. And get my texture coordinate, and I'm going to wire that into this one. And what I want to do with this is I want to change the settings on this one. I want to make it much smaller, so I'm going to go in and say, let's make this one 10 by 10. This is going to be a little tiny amount. This is going to be multiplied 10 times over. So basically, if I will update, yeah, you can see it looks kind of, it's going like completely blue. That's because the pattern is now so small you can't see it in that little window, because I'm multiplying it by 10. So it's being tiled 10 times X on the X and 10 times on the Y. So you're getting a much smaller pattern on that one. All right. So this area down here is my normal maps. And then I'm going to go ahead and we'll wire this up into normal. I'm not done yet. I still got a few more things to wire up here. So we have it. But there's my normals down over here. And you can see you can move these things around. And it gets, trying to find the way to organize these things is a real pain. So you get, wires stretched out to where you need them. You can keep moving things around until you get them all set up the way you look. Now, all nodes have to be wired up. All right, so I've got an alpha map here that's not wired, an alpha channel that's not wired up. I've got a B channel over here that's not wired up. I got an alpha channel there, and then if I look back down below, those look like they're all wired up. If I come down here, these are all wired up down below. but I have an A channel coming, or an A slot here in my first multiply that's got to go somewhere also. So at this point, let's go back up and let's look at this. I changed the texture coordinates on this moss down over here to 10 by 10. And I talked earlier, mistakenly at the time, but it's still true, that the size of that moss is inordinately large for the building itself. The building is the same size that's going to be, but the moss is way too big. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go and I'm going to add one more coordinate, texture coordinate, up here. Okay, and I'm going to wire that one into the moss here. And since that's the one I'm going to be using, I also need to wire this in to that moss right there. So both of those mosses have to have a smaller texture value than they currently have. And I'm going to go in, and I think what I'll do on this one is I'm going to do 6 by 8. I'm going to make it just a little bit different. Okay, you can play with the values on that one, and you can kind of see what's happening with it. But that's going to be my texture coordinates that we're going to be using for the moss. And so I'll put a comment on that one, and we'll just type in here coordinates for the moss, just so I know that that's what that particular element is doing, or anybody else can look at it and see. And you can see how jumbled this gets, and yet it tells you specifically what each section does. So it makes it actually a little bit easier to see what's going on. I can pick these things up and move them around, and I can tell at a glance now which of these nodes or groupings of nodes are handling each individual thing. Right? So I got a few more things I need to close up here to my mask. So what do I have going on? Well, all right, let's look up here at the top. Right, this is my building material, and some of it is building and some of it is moss. My moss texture coordinates have been set, so I know that my moss is considerably smaller than it was. I've got one grouping of moss that's texture coordinates of 6 and 8, so it's 6 times tiled on the X and 8 times tiled on the Y. And then I've got this secondary amount of moss going into it that's coming in down here. This is sort of a lower level of moss, so I've got big bumpiness going on and a bunch of small bumpiness going in there to simulate that patch of moss. And then I just have to determine where that's going to be. Now I already know on my mask over here, the blue channel is what is handling the mask for the moss. So I'm just going to grab my blue channel, and I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to tie that into my alpha right there. So we've got that. All right. Now, in this particular case, the way that this thing is constructed, I said a second ago that you have to make sure that all of your little nodes are tied off. And I also talked earlier about how the fact that you can only do 2 things at a time. And I can't do 3 things at a time. And this is one of those situations. This lerp right here is a situation where, or this one right here is one where I needed 3 things. I've got my A, I've got my B, and I have the combination of it. But this one is being tied into this lerp. I don't really have a third texture to go into my B slot. And the lerp is what I have to use because I'm taking these images right here, and I am going to go in and say they are going to be affected by an alpha channel. And one of my alpha channels is going to determine which of these things is building and which of these things is moss. But I don't really have a third one to tie into B. So in a lerp, you only need to use one of those 2 slots. You don't always need to use them both. Unlike a multiply or unlike other things or an add where you need to use both slots or a subtract. A lerp is one where it says I'm going to take A and I'm going to do something with A and B and blend it together using a particular channel over here. I don't have anything to blend that together with. Okay, but I have 2 different masks that I have to use. I've got one mask for this one, and I'm going to have another mask for this one down over here. So because of that, I have to have a separate lerp there. Now this one is going to come over, and it is also going to get tied into my red channel. And what this is going to do when I let go of it is it's going to change that. So some of that is building, and some of that is moss. Make sure that I got this one all set up correctly. Make sure I'm not missing anything. I think I had one more down here. Yes, I've got one more multiply down here. This multiply, which is dealing with the normals, okay, this is dealing with the normals of the moss in the building, is also going to go up here to my mask and also get tied into the blue channel. And that's just controlling the normal map that you're going to be seeing in the moss. I can't really get down to look at that moss, but that's handling that down there. All right, now this is what I usually have to do when I'm doing something like this, is you need to compare the picture, the final picture of the entire thing with everything. Number one, you want to go through and make sure, like I said, with the exception of lerps, everything should have all of the slots filled. So if there's an A and a B slot, an A and a B slot, an A and a B slot, they should all be filled up somehow, some way. All right. The other thing I do is when I'm dealing with something like this, my mask over here, I'm not using the green channel for anything because the reflectivity works for the red channel and not the green channel. So I don't have anything coming out of the green channel, but I've got all the basic moss stuff is coming out of the blue channel, which is the moss. Everything else is coming out of the red channel because that's the rest of the image. And then what I do is I go in and look at the picture here. There's the main picture, and I make sure that in this particular case there are 3 lines coming out of my blue channel and there are 3 lines coming out of my red channel. So what I do is I just go back to make sure that that's actually what I have, and I've got 1, 2, 3 coming out of my red channel here, and I got 1, 2, and 3 coming out of the blue channel. So everything is set up the way that it's supposed to be. It's one of those things where you look at this texture and you go, well, it looks like I got it all done, and that picture looks okay, but you may have missed something somewhere. So you just kind of need to double check and make sure that everything's got what you want. And then you just, when you're done, click Save, go ahead and close it down. And now my texture, my material is done. So there's my material. It's all set up and ready to go. My building assets, however, are not textured yet. So in order to do that, what you'll do is you're just going to open up, I'll open up this window right here. You'll open up the window. You'll see the window right there. What you'll do is you'll just go here and look at your materials. Okay. Let's make that a little smaller. Okay, there's my material. What you can do is you just make sure that it's highlighted down here, and then in the object, the asset window, you just click the little button right there, and you've got it. And if you go and you look at this one, what you'll see is you'll see a reflection of the world in the windows, and you'll see the texture on there. And if you look really closely, you'll be able to see the normal map is actually making things look bumpy. You're seeing I'm getting a little highlight off the glass there, some of the reflections. I can see the world, and it all looks really good. So the last thing I want to do to each of these models is, remember, I turned off collision box. So in each of these, I'm just going to go in, and we're just going to add a box simplified collision as we go through them. All right. Now, the only one that doesn't apply to, just so you know, building assets, the only one that doesn't apply to is going to be the doorway. Okay. Actually, they're all going to work that way. There's no open door there. So all of them are going to do the same thing. You're just going to go in, you're going to click on the material, click to add that in here, and then you're going to go up to collision and add a simplified box collision to them. That way you know for sure that exactly how it's going to work. If you need to create an open doorway, what I have done is I've actually provided for you in here the side of the door, right there. Go back and get the material and put the material on that. There's the side of the door. So what you have is you've got the side, you have this, and you also have the door as a separate element. So So I'll go back, make sure that that's highlighted, and click on that. So what you can do is if you need to build a door that's supposed to be open, you want to be able to get into a building, we're not going to animate the doors yet, but I just want to create a door that's animated, or that's ready to be opened, or a door that is already open, and I'm just going to go in and position it that way. Then the way I'm going to build that is I'm going to use 2 of these pieces, and I'm going to use 1 door between them to build it out that way. So that's the way that those are all going to work. What I'll do is a separate video. This one's kind of long. I'm going to do a separate video and show you once these things are all done. I'll go back and get them all, the texture all on here, and get the collision boxes on all of them. What I'm going to do at that point is I'm going to come back into my world, and I'm going to show you how to start building the world.